Hello everyone, and welcome to my Beyond the Gates official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Anita burst into tears when the doctor informed her that she had stage 4 leukemia, and the entire world around her seemed to collapse into a muffled hum as if the hospital walls themselves were breathing in slow motion, holding their breath in sympathy for the devastation unfolding before her. She sat there, staring at the stack of medical reports on the corner of the polished desk, each line of unfamiliar scientific terminology blurring into abstract strokes of dark ink, while Dr. Hawthorne, with his soft voice and pity-filled eyes, leaned forward and tried to guide her through the impossible reality that her body had been silently betraying her for months, maybe even years, without a single warning loud enough for her to hear, and her hands trembled uncontrollably as she tried to process the fact that everything she thought she still had time for, her daughter's engagement, the business she was planning to expand, the grudges she kept, the apologies she delayed, the celebrations she postponed, had just been placed on a timer she couldn't negotiate with or run away from. She could feel the room spinning despite being completely still, and it wasn't until she tasted salt on her lips that she realized she was crying harder than she had cried since her husband died, harder than she had cried when she lost her childhood home, harder than she had cried when her best friend turned her back on her during the darkest chapter of her life, because this time the pain wasn't something outside of her. This time it was inside her, threading itself through her blood, infiltrating her marrow, determining its own timeline with no concern for the plans she had carefully laid out for the coming year. She wanted to scream, to run, to bargain with whatever higher power might be listening, to demand that this be a mistake, a mix-up, a misreading of a chart or a test. Anything other than the horrifying truth that had just been dropped at her feet, but her voice locked itself somewhere deep in her throat, allowing only a tremor to escape as she whispered, barely audible, "Are you sure?" And the doctor, who had surely been asked that question by countless patients across his long career, simply lowered his gaze and nodded with the solemn heaviness of a man who wished he could give her a different answer, and as the weight of the diagnosis settled over her shoulders like a suffocating blanket, her mind raced to Sharon, her estranged daughter, who still hadn't forgiven her for the secret she hid, secrets that once felt necessary to protect the family but now seemed absurdly small compared to the monstrous reality Anita was facing, and she wondered if she would have the strength or the time to repair what had been broken between them, to sit across from Sharon and confess the truth behind every lie, every omission, every moment she chose silence over vulnerability. Because for the first time in decades, the idea of dying didn't frighten her nearly as much as the idea of leaving this world with her daughter believing she never truly loved her. Outside the examination room, the hospital hallway buzzed with the chaotic rhythm of ordinary life. Nurses exchanging charts, patients being wheeled by on gurneys, phones ringing, machines beeping, but inside the room, time stretched endlessly, trapping Anita in the echo of her own heartbeat as she tried to find meaning, reason, or even a sliver of hope in the doctor's explanation of treatment options. That seemed more like a list of desperate attempts than promises of recovery, and she kept wiping her face only for more tears to spill over, unstoppable, raw, and pure in a way grief rarely is, because this grief was not for something she had already lost but for the life she suddenly realized she might never get to finish living. She thought about the garden she always wanted to plant but never had time for, the recipe her grandmother taught her that she had been meaning to pass down to Sharon, the trips she told herself she would take when things slowed down, the people she pushed away, the apologies she withheld, the forgiveness she never granted, all piling together inside her chest like a fragile tower threatening to fall apart at the slightest touch, and she felt a deep, gut-wrenching ache for every version of herself that believed she still had years ahead to fix everything she broke. She wondered who she should call first, her sister, her closest friend, or Sharon, and the thought of saying the words out loud, "I have stage 4 leukemia," made her stomach twist with dread, because saying it once would make it real in way she wasn't ready to face, yet she also knew that every minute she waited would be another minute stolen from the truth she needed to share before it was too late. The doctor gently passed her a tissue, then another, and when she finally stood up, legs trembling, breath uneven, she braced herself against the examination table as though the floor beneath her might collapse, and she whispered a shaky, "Thank you," because gratitude was easier than admitting she was terrified, and as she stepped into the hallway and heard the door click shut behind her, she felt the world pressing forward, indifferent to her devastation, and realized that no matter how much she wanted everything to pause, life around her would keep moving, just as it always had, with or without her. And in that moment, Anita made a silent vow to fight, not because she believed the odds were in her favor, but because she refused to let her story end with words she never said, wounds she never healed, or love she never expressed. And with her diagnosis echoing in her mind like a broken bell, she took her first step toward the unknown, carrying with her a desperation she had never known, a fear she couldn't shake, and a flicker of hope she didn't fully understand yet, but one she clung to with everything she had left. But as Anita staggered down the hallway, still clutching the crumpled tissues the doctor had handed her, she felt an overwhelming dizziness wash over her, not the sort that made her vision blur, but the kind that came from the sudden realization that every step she took from here on out meant stepping into a future she no longer recognized, and she struggled to breathe as she passed the family waiting room where a young mother was laughing with her two small sons, the sound of their joy slicing through her chest like a dull blade, because she couldn't remember the last time she laughed like that, the last time she felt joy without calculating how much time she had left to enjoy it, and she had to force herself not to crumble right there in front of them because she didn't want her tragedy to seep into the lives of strangers who still lived in the blissful illusion of ordinary problems. She made her way to the elevator and pressed the down button with a trembling finger, praying the doors would open before her knees gave out, and when they finally slid apart with a soft chime, she stepped inside and gripped the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white as the doors closed her into a quiet metal box where the silence felt heavier than any diagnosis could ever be, and she stared at her reflection in the mirrored panel, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her, eyes red and swollen, cheeks streaked with tears, lips trembling with words she couldn't yet speak, and it terrified her to realize that this version of herself might be the one she had to show her daughter, her family, the world. As the elevator descended, she imagined calling Sharon, imagined her daughter's voice, stern, wounded, distant, answering the phone and hearing Anita try to form sentences that would sound like pleas for forgiveness disguised as medical updates, and the image made her chest tighten even further because their relationship had become a battlefield of silence, a terrain neither of them dared to cross without expecting mines hidden beneath every emotional step. And now Anita wondered if she even had the right to ask Sharon for support when she was the one who contributed to the walls built between them. The door dinged again, and as she stepped out into the lobby, sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, warm and golden, almost mocking in its brightness, and she felt momentarily exposed, as though the entire world could see her secret, her diagnosis, her unraveling grief, and she hurried toward the exit, taking shallow breaths to keep her sobs from exploding into the open air. But the moment she pushed through the double doors and felt the crisp wind brush against her skin, her composure shattered, and she pressed a shaking hand to her mouth to stifle the cry building in her chest. Cars passed by, people chatted on sidewalks, a teenager laughed loudly at something on his phone, and all of it felt so painfully normal that Anita found herself wishing, just for a second, that the sky would turn gray, or the earth would shake, or something, anything, would happen to show the world that her life had just changed forever. But the universe remained unfazed, still spinning, still indifferent, and she found herself sinking onto a bench near the hospital entrance, trying to catch her breath as her mind cycled through everything she had to do next. Treatments, calls, papers, the possibility of losing her hair, the fear of her body weakening, the crushing need to tell someone, anyone, before she drowned in silence. She pulled her phone from her purse and stared at Sharon's name in her contacts list, her thumb hovering over the call button as memories of her daughter's childhood flashed before her. Sharon's first steps, the way she used to cling to Anita's leg whenever she was scared, the nights they stayed up late baking cookies, laughing so hard they cried, the moment Sharon found out the truth about her father, and the look of betrayal that shattered whatever remained of their bond. And Anita felt a sob escape her as she realized how badly she wanted to repair things before illness took away her chance, but fear held her hostage, whispering that Sharon might reject her, might hang up, might say the words that would break her completely. It's too late, so she lowered the phone, rubbing her forehead as tears spilled down her cheeks once more, and she told herself she just needed a minute. One more minute to gather the courage she had never needed so desperately before, and she closed her eyes, inhaling deeply as she imagined a different version of events. One where she walked inside Sharon's house unannounced and was greeted with open arms. One where mother and daughter embraced as though nothing had ever driven them apart. One where apologies were received instead of resented, but wishful thinking dissolved quickly, replaced by the sharp sting of reality, and she forced herself to open her eyes just as her phone buzzed unexpectedly. She nearly dropped it in surprise, and when she saw the name flashing across the screen, Sharon, her heart stopped, her breath caught, and the world narrowed to that single moment as she realized she hadn't even called her yet. Meaning her daughter had reached out first, unaware of the diagnosis, unaware that her mother's world had just tilted off its axis, and Anita hesitated, terrified but hopeful, staring at the incoming call that felt like the universe handing her the first fragile thread of a second chance, and with trembling hands, she finally swiped her thumb across the screen, whispering a weak, shaky hello into the receiver as she braced herself for whatever would come next, knowing that this conversation might determine whether she would face her illness with her daughter by her side or walk into the hardest battle of her life alone. Hello, Anita whispered, her voice cracking so severely she almost didn't recognize the sound as her own, and for a moment there was only silence on the other end, tense, shaky, loaded silence, before Sharon finally spoke, her tone guarded and uneven, as if she had rehearsed what she wanted to say, but lost her nerve at the very last second, and she cleared her throat before uttering a soft, almost reluctant, "Mom, are you busy?" which sent a tremor through Anita's entire body because it had been so long since Sharon had used that simple, intimate word without bitterness, and Anita felt her heart twist painfully as she struggled to respond, forcing out a fragile, "No, sweetheart, I'm not busy at all," though every cell in her body felt like it was collapsing in on itself, and she had to grip the bench tightly to keep from falling apart. Sharon exhaled slowly, audibly, the kind of sigh that carried years of unspoken grief, resentment, hesitation, and beneath it, buried but unmistakably present, a hint of longing, a desire for something neither of them had been able to name for years, and she said, "I didn't know if I should call, but I've been thinking a lot, and there's something I need to talk to you about," which made Anita's heart race with panic because she wasn't ready, she wasn't prepared. She could barely breathe under the weight of her diagnosis, let alone confront the emotional storm she knew was coming. But she nodded instinctively, even though Sharon couldn't see her, whispering, "Of course, honey, I'm here," while brushing tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, and Sharon hesitated again, her voice tightening as she said, "I saw Aunt Celia today," and the mention of that name felt like a punch to the gut. Celia, the sibling who had always kept Sharon informed about the things Anita wasn't brave enough to say herself, and Anita swallowed hard as Sharon continued. She told me you've been asking about me a lot lately, and she said you didn't look well the last time she saw you," and the tremor in Sharon's voice deepened, betraying the worry she was trying desperately to conceal, and Anita felt her chest tighten as she murmured, "I'm fine. There's a lot going on." But the lie hung between them like a toxic cloud neither woman wanted to breathe. Sharon's breath grew shallow, anxious, and she said, "Mom, listen, I don't want to fight anymore. I don't want to keep replaying the past every time we talk. I'm tired. I'm so damn tired." And a crack in her voice made Anita cover her mouth to smother the sob that threatened to escape because hearing her daughter's pain, hearing her daughter want something better, It was almost too much to bear, especially knowing what Anita now knew about her own limited time. And before Anita could gather the courage to confess the truth, Sharon added, softly but urgently, "I think we need to fix this while we still can." And those last words sliced Anita open with a depth of sorrow she couldn't hide because Sharon didn't know. She had no idea how painfully accurate that sentiment was, and Anita felt torn between relief and devastation, wanting to embrace this newfound openness, but terrified that once she revealed her diagnosis, the fragile bridge Sharon was offering might crumble again. Anita wiped her tears, inhaled deeply, and opened her mouth to speak, to tell her daughter the truth, to finally utter the words that had been choking her since the doctor said stage 4. But before she could form even a single syllable, Sharon's voice cracked again, shakier than before, as she said, "Mom, there's more. Something happened. Something I need to tell you before you hear it from someone else." And Anita froze, her heart slamming against her ribs as dread flooded her veins, because the tone in Sharon's voice wasn't angry, it wasn't offensive, it was frightened, vulnerable, like she was bracing for impact from a secret she didn't know how to carry alone. And in that moment, Anita forgot her diagnosis, forgot her own pain, forgot every fear strangling her, because nothing terrified her more than the sound of her daughter's voice trembling like that, and she leaned forward, whispering urgently, almost pleading, "Sharon, sweetheart, what happened? Tell me," as the wind rustled through the hospital courtyard, carrying the weight of their fractured history into the cold air while mother and daughter teetered on the edge of a truth neither of them were ready to hear. Sharon inhaled shakily, the kind of breath someone takes when they're standing on the edge of a confession that could change everything, and Anita felt her stomach drop as her daughter whispered, "Mom, something happened at the Winterfest gala last night." Her voice, so fragile, it sounded like it might splinter apart mid-sentence, and a blast of cold dread shot down Anita's spine because she knew Winterfest was never just a party and beyond the gates. Secrets surfaced there like clockwork. Alliances collapsed, and truth had a way of dragging everyone into the spotlight whether they were ready or not. Anita pressed a hand against her aching chest, steadying her breathing as Sharon continued in a trembling whisper. There was an argument, a really bad one, and the words hung heavy between them like storm clouds gathering, and Anita could hear footsteps in the background, the faint slam of a car door, Sharon pacing somewhere outdoors as though she couldn't say what she needed to say unless she was moving, and then Sharon's voice cracked even harder as she added, "It was between me and Vernon," which made Anita jolt upright on the bench, because Vernon, Sharon's fiancé, the man everyone expected her to marry in the spring, was the last person Anita would have imagined her daughter clashing with so violently that she would call her mother the next day in tears. Anita gripped her phone tightly, pulse racing, and whispered, "What happened with Vernon? Did he hurt you?" Her voice trembling with a frantic blend of fear and maternal instinct, and Sharon quickly responded, No, he didn't touch me, Mom. He would never, but he said something. Something I can't come back from." And hearing her daughter's voice waver on that last word made Anita feel physically ill, her maternal panic swelling so fiercely she momentarily forgot about the cancer consuming her body. The wind picked up on Sharon's end, rustling leaves, carrying her uneven breaths into the receiver, and she finally forced herself to say it. "He told me he knows about the envelope. The one you hid. The one with Dad's real medical records." And Anita's blood ran cold, her world tilting dangerously as she whispered, "Sharon, how would Vernon know about that envelope?" Because she had hidden those papers decades ago, buried them under layers of secrets and guilt and desperate attempts to protect her daughter from a truth she had never meant for anyone else to uncover, and Sharon's response came out in a broken rush. Aunt Celia told him. She said she was tired of watching us tear each other apart over lies that everyone else already knew the truth about, and Anita felt the air leave her lungs as though she had been punched because betrayal from a sister was sharp enough, but Sharon finding out through Vernon, on the eve of what was supposed to be their future, was a level of devastation Anita never saw coming. She felt dizzy, her vision blurring, and Sharon kept talking, her voice shaking uncontrollably now. "Vernon said he couldn't marry me until I dealt with the mess between us. He said I'm carrying pain that isn't mine, that I'm still punishing you for something you were trying to protect me from, and Anita felt tears spill down her cheeks as she whispered, "Sweetheart, please," but she couldn't even form the rest of the sentence because shame wrapped its hands around her throat, choking off her words, and then Sharon added the part that made Anita's entire body go cold. "I told him he didn't understand anything about our family, about you, about me, about Dad and I. Said maybe we shouldn't get married at all," and the sheer devastation in Sharon's voice made Anita's heart fracture, because this wasn't just a fight. This wasn't just an argument. This was the kind of fissure that could end an engagement, alter someone's future, destroy the life Sharon had finally rebuilt after years of heartbreak. Anita pressed her trembling fingers against her eyes, whispering, "Oh God, Sharon, what have I done to you?" But Sharon cut her off softly, almost tenderly, with a voice so full of hurt it made Anita sob. "Mom, I didn't call because of Vernon. I called because I don't know what's happening to us anymore. And when you didn't answer earlier, I got scared. I got scared I was too late." And those last words hit Anita harder than any medical diagnosis possibly could, because her daughter, her fiercely guarded, emotionally wounded daughter, was admitting fear, admitting longing, admitting she still cared, and Anita's heart broke open completely as she realized she couldn't keep the truth from Sharon any longer. Not after this. Not when her daughter's future was unraveling and she herself was running out of time, and with her breath shaking and tears streaming down her face, she whispered, "Sharon, sweetheart, there's something I need to tell you too," knowing that the next sentence she spoke would change both of their lives forever.